On Monday, May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, a Minneapolis man, died as the result of his interaction with a Minneapolis police officer who knelt on his neck for minutes as he suffocated. This is not the video I wanted to be making today, and this is not the video that anyone should want to be watching right now. But it is a conversation that needs to be had. Because the tragedy is that this was not just an isolated incident. This is not the first time we have seen something like this happen. We all know that incidents of police brutality are something that keep coming up, and it is a conversation that we as Christians need to have because we cannot turn a blind eye to the pain and suffering that is going on all around us. And I want to say from the outset, I know, believe me, I know I am the last person that is qualified to be having this conversation. I have not experienced the pain and suffering that come as a result of police brutality in my community, in my family, myself. I have been luxuriously disconnected from it. And I recognize what a privilege that is, and I recognize that there are so many people that could speak better on this topic. But I make this video because I realize that silence in many ways can become an affirmation, and I do not want to sit idly by while we see things happen that can not be excused and allow them to continue happening without saying anything. You see, in reality, this is not just a conversation about police brutality. It's even bigger than that. It's a conversation about justice. And while the Bible doesn't say anything about police brutality per se, it has lots to say about justice. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because as Christians, as we respond to the death of George Floyd and others like him, as we see things like this continue to pervade our society, we need to look to the Bible to see how do we respond in a biblical Christian manner so that that can dictate how we move forward. The first thing that I want to do today is to just lay out very briefly what the Bible has to say about justice. And I don't want to do this just through throwing proof texts at you to say, here, I got one verse, and then you should hang your entire theological system on this. But to look at the Bible holistically, what does it say about justice? I'm going to try to do that quickly, which won't be easy, but here we go. In the very beginning, on the first page of the Bible, we see that humans are created in the image of God. And this is the foundation upon which the Bible rests its entire structure of justice. We are to treat other people justly because they too are created in the image of God. And then as the biblical story progresses, we see God revealing himself to a specific people group. This comes into focus with Abraham, a man to whom God reveals himself and says that out of you will come a great nation, and I will bless you so that you can be a blessing to the entire world. You see, God's plan was to take this man and out of him to create a nation, and he would bless them. He would be a nation that he would bestow special favor upon, but not just for them, but that they could be a blessing to all the world. You see, but then things begin to go south. This people group that God has singled out for special blessing, that they could bless the world, well, they become enslaved at the hands of the Egyptians, one of the world's great superpowers of the time. This minority people group feels the weight of injustice and oppression, but then God delivers them. He brings them out of slavery in Egypt, miraculously delivering them from the hands of their oppressors. But as the narrative continues, specifically in the book of Deuteronomy, we see God continually reminding the people, hey, don't forget where you came from. Don't mistreat people because remember that you were enslaved. He has this as part of their ethos as a people group, that they would not forget what it is like to be oppressed. They would not forget what it is like to be a marginalized people group. They would not forget what it is like to be mistreated. That is God's vision. But then they fall short. Despite God trying to ingrain in them time and time again, hey, do not forget that you were enslaved, so then treat people the way you would want to be treated. Well, in fact, they rise to power, they have a kingdom, and they begin to be oppressive just like the Egyptians. But then the prophets come about and acting as a mouthpiece for God to the people and the kings of Israel. They tell them, hey, don't forget what God has always told you. You know, in Micah, it's put very succinctly. It says that you are to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before God. They are reminded by Jeremiah and other prophets time and time again that God is a God of justice. And all throughout the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament as it's often called, we see this vision of God being a God who desires justice, not just for his own people, but for the foreigner, for the widows, for the downtrodden, for the poor. He desires that justice would be done because he sees all people as those created in his own image, and he calls his people to be a blessing to them because that was always the point, that he would be a blessing to the Israelites so that they could bless the world. Then Jesus comes on the scene and he starts a new kingdom. And it's a kingdom marked by his command that he gives to his disciples before his death, that they would love one another as he has loved them. And he would show that love by dying for guilty people. He would die for the very people who were oppressing him. He would die for people who certainly didn't deserve it, like you and like me. You see, Jesus, the one person who lived a righteous, sinless life, died on the behalf of others. And if this isn't a compelling view of justice, I don't know what is. A crucified Savior who dies at the hands of the world's superpower, a marginalized minority man who is crucified on behalf of the sins of others so that they could be blessed. That is a justice that we never, ever deserved. And that kingdom that he started, well, its vehicle is the church as it spreads the rule and reign of Jesus, and that they would be salt and light to the world. That this church would be pockets and epicenters of justice and mercy and love that would shine forth for the rest of the world to see. And that is what me and you as Christians live into today. That we are to be people that show the love of God to the entire world, because that is what God has done for us when we did not deserve it. And so as we begin to see that justice is at the heartbeat of the gospel, it begins to bring up the question of why has there been in Christian circles such a butting of heads between social justice on this hand and gospel on the other hand, and people like John MacArthur come up with entire treatises on how we should reckon the two, and it becomes this flashpoint for people that social justice becomes this dirty word. And I felt that in making videos, that I've been scared of saying certain things because I know the comments that will come in. Oh, we just have a social justice warrior, you've forgotten the gospel. But you see, the problem is these things were never meant to be pitted against each other. One was meant to flow from the other. You see, yes, the gospel, the good news about Jesus is central to being a Christian. That is what it is all about. That is our message. But you see, the gospel is not merely the message of how we as individuals get saved and escape this world and go to heaven so we don't have to deal with these problems. Yes, the gospel is that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us that we could have life in him. But what does that look like? And what does that mean? You see, ever since the fall of humanity, the primary problem in our world has been sin. And sin comes from a distrust in God, not trusting that his view of what is good and what is right, that he knows what is best for us. And so yes, our primary problem in the world is our lack of trust in God. So yes, we need to lead with the gospel. But as people are transformed by the message of Jesus, they can't help but transform their communities, because it's not just me and God in a vertical plane, but it's also about as Christ has loved us, so we must love one another. The greatest commandment, Jesus says, is to love the Lord our God with all our heart and soul and mind and strength. And the second is like it, to love our neighbor as ourselves. You see, you really can't fulfill that first commandment. You can't love God without loving one another. You see, in this we find that social justice flows out of our love for God. That as we love God, we can't help but be agents for change in the world around us because we love them as Christ has loved us. And that is a transformative love. Now, we do not get a savior complex. We are not the saviors of the world. Jesus alone is. But we can't help but love God and love people. We should have never pitted these against each other, and it has created so many unnecessary problems. So, as Christians, how do we respond to police brutality and injustice? Because respond we must. The first point is that we need to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn. We need to see that this is not just someone else's problem, but that these people that are hurting, they are made in the image of God just like us, and that we have an obligation to these people to love them dearly as Christ loves them. So yes, we weep with those who weep and we mourn with those who mourn. We say that this is a tragedy because it is a tragedy. We do not glance over this. The second thing we do, just as Micah said, we do justice, we love mercy, and we walk humbly. Doing justice is an active thing. We have to pursue this. This does not come passively for us. You're not going to just be in bed and be doing justice. You're not just going to be sitting there and doing justice. This is something that we have to actively pursue, and it's not easy and it's uncomfortable, but we need to take that step because we are Christians. Thirdly, just as God told the Israelites time and time again, we're to be the types of people who look out for the vulnerable, the oppressed, the marginalized. We are to be people that care about them because God cares about them. And if we don't, who will? This is the job of the church. If it wasn't for the message of the gospel, the entire idea of justice that Western society is built upon would not be there. It is the church that originally told people that, yes, all people matter. And so we must not now shy away from that for fear that it will get us away from the gospel, but realize actually we were the ones that came up with this first, that we should do justice, that we are people who look out for those who are left out, because that is what we do, because that is what our God does for us. And we as people who follow him, of course, are going to walk in those footsteps and look out for the vulnerable. And fourth and finally, we point people towards the hope of the world, and that is Jesus, the message of the gospel, the good news about Jesus, his life, his death, his resurrection, his kingdom. We point people to Jesus. You see, I understand in part why some Christians can get squeamish with this, because there has been a history of people neglecting the gospel and only looking for social justice, only looking to make change in the world and not focusing on the true root problem. They look at the symptoms but not the problem, which is sin and people's disconnection with our Creator. But as I said earlier, we as Christians, we rightly order this, that we are people who out of our love for God cannot help but see justice overflow from that. But we do recognize that we live in a hurting and dying and broken world, and that we are not the Savior. We cannot single-handedly save the world, and politics are not the hope of the world. That is a dangerous, dangerous thing to put your hope in, and is a recipe for letdown and pain. Politics will not solve all of our problems, but that doesn't mean we simply abstain from anything that seems political. No, we point people to the ultimate hope, who is Jesus. We love first and foremost Jesus, and we allow that love that he has given us to overflow into the world, and that can't help but come out in justice as we see the way that God sees people, and we realize that the only way to treat them would be to treat them as God would treat them. And we say, you know what, I think Jesus would stand up for these people. I think Jesus would say something. I don't think Jesus would be silent. I think Jesus would love in this situation. So no matter how hard that is, no matter how uncomfortable that is what I need to do too if I'm truly going to be a follower of Jesus, not just a fan of his teachings, but to truly follow him. That is what this is all about. That is what this all comes down to. So yes, of course, 1000%, Jesus is the hope of the world, and we will not budge on that. But Jesus is the hope of the world because the message of Jesus is actually good news for the world, not just for individuals, but for the entire world. And that is the wonder of the gospel. So as Christians, we look at the situation and we say, something must be done. And who will do it if not the church and followers of Jesus? I'm begging you, let's step into our calling as Christians to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before our God. Well, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Truly, it means so much to me. And I hope I didn't ruffle too many feathers, but honestly, I felt like this is a conversation that needs to be had. And if you're someone that has experienced the pain of injustice or police brutality, my heart breaks for you. I would love to hear your story, to weep with you, to mourn with you, to pray with you. Most importantly, I want you to know that God sees your pain. He feels your pain. He cries with you, and he cries out for justice in this world with you. If you are new to this channel and you enjoyed this video and you think that you want to get behind messages like this, I'd encourage you to hit subscribe to become a part of what we're doing here on this channel. And to everyone who's already done that, to those of you who are liking, commenting, sharing these videos with your friends, it truly means so much, and I hope this is a message that you want to get behind as well. Until next time, guys, be on the lookout for more videos, and as always, go out and love God and love people, because that will change the world. Peace. I love you guys so much. I'll see you next time.